Thank you, Sir David. As Sir David said, I have a hard act to follow, and a lot of what I'm going to say is already being covered by other speakers. But perhaps one topic hasn't been covered, and I became famous for it. I accidentally chaired a panel on corruption. And at the end of the panel, if this was at the Mongolia Economic Forum, I was told I have to sum up. And by the time I finished, the president was on stage and saying, "Why is it foreigners like him who only talk about corruption?" So I became the guy who speaks on the issues of corruption in Mongolia. Today, actually, I wanted to briefly share our thoughts on what is the path of development for Mongolia. We at Oxford Business Group, we producers of this fine report, have spent now 2 years monitoring the development of the Mongolian economy, mainly interviewing people like yourself in this room. And obviously the consensus is that Mongolia is absolutely going to enjoy high growth of GDP expansion. And if I can move to slide, sorry. Yeah. So everybody in this room agrees with this, roughly with this graph. The growth trajectory is going to be phenomenal. It's going to be double digits. It's going to be faster than most emerging markets. And that's what truly makes Mongolia stand out, even among the 34 countries that we cover. It is the true frontier market. It's what we call irrepressible growth story. So annual GDP of 10–20% at least, untapped investment and consumption, and also it's the newest member in the commodity boom story. So the key metrics, just to go through, is the 19th largest country by landmass. It's currently 139th in the world by population, 138th by GDP. It's one of the top 10 coal producers. It has, as been mentioned, over 1,000 mineral deposits. It is a leader, one of the leaders in coal, in copper, has also gold, iron ore, and rare earths. And the untapped, unmonetized wealth is well over $1 trillion, which, as John mentioned earlier, it translates into at least almost $500,000 per capita once monetized. So it's also a classical convergence story, going from low income to middle and upper middle income country bracket. It's probably, at this rate, will achieve this much faster than the other Asian tigers. For instance, we think that Mongolia can do what Thailand did in 20 years. It can probably do in about 10 years. So, we all know this is driven by insatiable demand for commodities in Asia, and especially China. Now, I want to touch upon, obviously, also the downside risk. This amazing growth story doesn't come, it's not irreversible, as some people think. There are examples of countries which had, abundance of resources, unfortunately, did not reach their potential. The top most often cited risks is obviously still there is a degree of regulatory uncertainty, like every emerging market. Mongolia is trying to balance the need for what we call resource nationalisms, i.e. distributing wealth to its own people, and also attracting FDI. It's a tough balance. It's a tough equation to square. So far, they have succeeded in winning the confidence of investors. And I would argue it stands out amongst emerging markets. Mongolia definitely has a more pro foreign investor policy than a number of commodity-driven resource markets. Another big risks is obviously because the economy is so dependent on resources, it's exposed to commodity demand shocks from China. At the moment, in particular, we feel there is a slowdown, and the country needs to develop what you call cushions, a big counter-cyclical resources to counter the softness in demand. So far, the monetary and fiscal policy has been pro-cyclical, and it's one of the key issues cited by the IMF. It needs to rein in the fiscal expenditure. It needs to tighten its monetary policy. And this obviously links into inflationary pressures. The inflation is still running in high double digits. It's putting, especially putting pressure on the most vulnerable members of Mongolian society, and it's a big political concern. So these, of course, Mongolians are very well advised. They have, apart from the IMF, a lot of foreign consultants. They are taking this advice. They're listening, and they are trying to learn from the best. But so far, from investors' point of view, it's still considered to be a risky story and reflected in its ratings. The Moody's B1 at the moment. So this just shows you in the graph the exposure to coking coal. Mongolia is one of the top suppliers of hard coking coal used in steel plants to China. It has a huge cost advantage. I think the cost of production is only $20 per ton, but it has a big problem in transportation. I think another $80 are spent on actually transporting to the Chinese border. But that also leaves a huge margin for improvement. Once the transportation railway is actually fixed, it can be one of the most competitive suppliers of hard coking coal to China. Obviously, we know the copper story. I'm sure colleagues from Rio will tell us more about it. But once again, it's a great source of revenue, but also potentially risky if economy is undiversified. So we do think, yes, that Oyu Tolgoi is a game changer, that it will add another engine to Mongolia's story. It will become one of the top copper producers, has a very long mine life, low costs, and proceeds of around 1 to 2 billion, which for an economy of 10 to 11 billion is around, almost a third. So, but we think for Mongolia to succeed, it does need to look beyond the minerals. And it has to start looking beyond minerals now. Because we've seen many countries end up in what we call a middle income trap. We think it's easy for Mongolia to get to a GDP per capita of $7,000, maybe $10,000. The big question, where does it go from there? We know that the potential is there. It can become one of the richest economies in the world, but I think it needs to focus on the long-term development strategy. There is already a lot going on in housing, in finance. The government is quite supportive, but we think there is a risk of putting too many eggs in one basket. At least we can see the already first signs of real estate bubbles. We don't see enough attention on other productive sectors like energy was mentioned here earlier. We think energy has to be prioritized. Mongolia has a lot of potential in renewables, in solar. Obviously, it can power its plants with its own coal. So there's really no excuse for underinvestment in these sectors. Also, huge potential in agribusiness. As was mentioned earlier, over 50 million of animals. It has a lot of land, and most of in fact, still almost 40% of its population works in agriculture. So it's a very, very important sector for Mongolia, and we definitely want to see more investment in this particular sector. Tourism, it's considered to be, Mongolia already has a strong brand. People know it, people understand it, doesn't need to invest in branding. It's an adventurous traveler paradise, very attractive landscapes, culture, and could be one of the new, as it were, markets for high spenders. Right now, the main issue is lack of facilities and lack of connectivity and just a ready-made product. So in conclusion, yes, very big opportunities, high growth, outperformance, but it is not a free ride. We think there are risks and that we would like to see more strategy, more long-term milestones, and implementation. So on that note, and the next step for we think is diversification. So on that note, I'd like to invite other members of the panel to perhaps address some of these challenges.
Thank you very much indeed, Paulius.